Welcome to the ICT Newscast. I'm Polly Dinette-Claw. Here are some of the top stories affecting Indigenous communities across the nation. First up, our very own Daniel Herrera Carbajal will walk us through the recent confirmation hearing for RFK Jr. and its impact on Indigenous health.
Robert Francis Kennedy Jr. recently appeared before the U.S. Senate Committee on Finance to be considered for the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. The known vaccine skeptic faced intense questioning from the committee pertaining to his past statements about the efficacy of vaccines and his suitability for the role. In his opening statement, Senator Ron Wyden said Kennedy should not be given the position.
After a careful review of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s statements, actions, and views, materials that I have reviewed personally and closely, I reached the conclusion that he should not be entrusted with the health and well-being of the American people.
Kennedy has had a controversial past with vaccines. He has made close to $5 million in book deals, mostly promoting, quote, junk science. In a book about measles and the measles vaccines, Kennedy wrote that Americans have been lied to about the efficacy of the measles vaccine. Kennedy said numerous times during the hearing that he is pro-vaccine, shifting from his previous statements about vaccines being dangerous. He also shifted his stance on reproductive rights. During his presidential campaign, Kennedy said he was pro-choice. During the hearing, he said something notably different.
I agree with him that we cannot be a moral nation if we have 1.2 million abortions a year.
This left many senators wondering where he really stands on important issues.
If you want to move from advocacy to public responsibility, Americans are going to need to hear a clear and trustworthy recantation of what you have said on vaccinations.
When was it that you decided to sell out the values you've had your whole life in order to be given power by President Trump?
Amidst the intense questioning, Kennedy vowed to bring in a Native American into his central office. Kennedy also agreed to Senator Ben Ray Lujan's question when asked if he would, quote, finalize the congressionally mandated FDA guidance to increase clinical trial diversity.
Do everything I can to make sure there's Native Americans to clinical trials.
If Kennedy were to be confirmed to head HHS, he would be in charge of overseeing agencies like the Center for Disease Control and the Food and Drug Administration. In an NPR interview, Kennedy said Trump had given him 3 instructions: to remove corruption from health agencies, to return these bodies to evidence-based science and medicine, and to end the chronic disease epidemic. Kennedy will succeed Javier Becerra, nominated to the position by former President Joe Biden in 2021. He was the first Latino in history to hold this position. His approach as secretary would be, quote, radical transparency. He cited a gold standard.
The gold standard means real scientific research with replication of studies.
For ICT News, Daniel Herrera Carbajal.
President Trump has been busy with a series of executive orders. One of the more surprising, the federal recognition of a southeastern tribe. Shirley Snavy has the details.
It's been a long road for the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, but last week President Donald Trump signed a memorandum that directs the Secretary of the Interior to assist the tribe in obtaining federal recognition. Tribal Chairman John Lowry shares his reaction.
The reaction was excitement. We've never had this level of support. We've had presidential candidates in the past say that they support us. We've had individuals who have become president say that they support us. But to actually have the President of the United States sitting in the Oval Office sign a memorandum stating that it's now the official policy of the United States that we will provide full federal recognition for the Lumbee tribe is definitely an exciting time for our people and definitely unprecedented.
A number of tribes across the country oppose this action, including the Eastern Band of Cherokees. Its principal chief, Michelle Hicks, says the Lumbees should go through the Interior Department's Office of Federal Acknowledgement, not Congress.
We've had a long-standing history with this issue, and we know that there's a proper way to do it through the OFA, so that the proper diligence can evaluate all the elements of the request. And so we are opposed to the congressional approach. We do believe that anyone deserves a fair chance. Any group seeking federal recognition should deserve a fair chance through the OFA process.
However, OFA was created in 1978, and the Lumbees were granted recognition during President Eisenhower's administration.
It has to go through Congress. So in 1956, the United States Congress passed the Lumbee Act. And as you know, that was during the era of Indian termination. And so, the United States government was getting out of the Indian business and was terminating relationships and doing what they were doing to try to get our people to assimilate and to do away with our tribal government and stuff like that. And so we got tied up in that. We were recognized by the United States Congress, but at the same time, they said you cannot receive any type of benefits, any programming that tribes receive. And so ever since 1956, we've been stuck in this legal limbo. And so only Congress can undo what Congress has done. And so Congress does have to move. Congress does have to pass a bill righting the wrong that they did in 1956.
The act was acknowledged in 1956, but basically all the act did this was not a reversal of a termination scenario in based on our research and opinions. It was just simply an acknowledgement of anybody that wanted to raise their hand and be identified as a Native American and you live in this 5-county area, then your name is now Lumbee. And so Lumbee's never been a historical tribal name in any of the research that I've seen. And, the unfortunate part is that, and this is completely out of the demographics of Cherokee people, is, Robeson County's in eastern North Carolina. There's more than one tribe in between, the Catawbas and the Tuscaroras, which were historically known tribes. But the Lumbees were recognized by the state of North Carolina as the Cherokees of Robeson County from 1913 to 1953. And again, that's an issue in itself. I mean, obviously wrongfully titled during that period of time. And so this fight has been going on for well over a century.
The Lumbee was granted state recognition in 1885. The White House memorandum says the Lumbees are descendants of several tribes, including Algonquin, Iroquois, and Siouan language families.
We have a budget now of over about $40 million. We have about 200 employees at the tribe. And, we're doing a lot of good things around the housing, around the energy, around youth, elders, veteran services, vocational rehab. So, we have a lot of good things going on at Lumbee. We often, work with other tribes to provide technical assistance around housing and other things like that. So, we have a lot going on. We have a lot of good things going on. We are a positive, bright light in southeastern North Carolina, and I'm just proud of the work that we're doing, and the things that we continue to do. And I'm just proud of the support that we have from Indian country, from our brothers and sisters across the Indian country. And I just want to thank them for standing with the Lumbee throughout the years and continuing to show that support for our people.
The Lumbee tribe consists of more than 55,000 members. If the Lumbee are successful in gaining federal recognition, it will become the largest tribe east of the Mississippi River and the 9th largest tribe in the nation, representing a significant voting bloc. For ICT, I'm Shirley Snavy.
Menogijiga Nungam. Menogijiga Nungam. It is a good day today. Menogijiga Nungam. The word Minnow is talking about something that is good, nice, or well. Gijigud is a word for day. And then Nungam means today. So we put all three together, we have Menogijiga Nungam. It is a good day today.
A recent memo to federal agencies ordered a halt to funding and loans, causing serious concerns about future funding for some Native programs. A federal judge blocked that order, and ultimately the administration rescinded it. We have a panel of experts here to talk about what this means for our community. Shirley Snavy has the discussion.
Tribal leaders are scrambling this week to stay late
They are responding to the Trump administration abruptly deciding to freeze federal funding in grants and loans that could impact more than $1 billion for funds for Indian country. A federal judge in Washington, D.C. stopped this at the last minute, but the question remains about the future of this funding for healthcare, education, climate projects, and other programs. Joining me to look at the impact in Indian country is Abigail Echohawk, the director of the Urban Indian Health Institute and the Seattle Indian Health Board, and she's a citizen of the Pawnee Nation. Robert Maxim is a fellow at the Brookings Metro and a citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. And regular contributor Mike Stopp, he's the president and CEO of Seven Star Holdings and a member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and also of Muskogee Creek descent. So thanks for getting up early and joining me. We're taping this on Wednesday morning, just so you've got some context about what our discussion is here. Let's start with the big picture. This funding freeze caught many people off guard. What is the uncertainty that remains, and what do each of you see as the most immediate impact on Indian country? Robert, let's start with you.
Yeah. So I think one of the takeaways that I've had from the last couple days is I don't know that the folks in the Trump administration seem to understand the full scope of what they were doing. Um, and I think that's an important context too, because for a lot of us that are kind of going through this in real time, it feels like it's nearly impossible to understand, what's actually being done and what the goals are here. And I think folks should, recognize that it's not clear to me that OMB, entirely anticipated the consequences of this themselves. So to me, the big takeaway is that, this wasn't specifically targeted toward Native communities. It'll absolutely impact Native communities if it goes forward. But it looks like we've just included every federal grant and loan here. And so I think that is, just important context that, um, and my co-panelists can speak to this, I'm sure. In the short run, this will absolutely affect programs and institutions serving our communities if this funding continues to be held up. But there is really an opportunity, I think, for folks in Indian country to make the case that, like, our funding is essential. It's part of this trust and treaty obligation that the federal government has to tribes, and it needs to be preserved as such. And so I think that that is one of the messages we need to keep in mind.
Abigail, I want to talk to you about this double whammy that your agency has experienced because last week all the health programs were put on hold, and now this week you've got this news. What's been the impact in your office?
So the impact has been pretty devastating in regards to particularly the staff morale. But I want to go back to one of the things that was mentioned earlier. And I would say, my agency wasn't taken by surprise. We expected something like this. This is not out of the norm for a new administration to do, which is to freeze certain programs, to halt some communications as a new administration comes in. However, it has never been, in my experience, this far reaching. So while we were prepared for some programs to potentially have frozen funding, we were not prepared for our entire agency. So I run a urban Indian health program funded by the Indian Health Service. And because we only receive approximately 2% of the overall IHA's budget for the urban Indian health programs, we supplement our service to our relatives through other federal grants. And that represents approximately 70% of our operating budget. And so I have relatives coming in our doors every single day, and our money was frozen earlier this week. We were unable to draw down initially the resources that we were promised of resources we had already paid out. We weren't getting those reimbursements. And so it maybe seemed minimal for just a couple of days, but that couple of days throws our entire finance team, our entire strategy on how we keep up with those reimbursements off. And it also threatens our team members. We already have a drastic shortage of healthcare workers within Indian country. And in fact, most Indian health programs have 25% lack of providers within their facilities. And here we've opened up the opportunity of even more uncertainty and us having to try to reassure our staff that their jobs are going to be safe and the relatives that we serve, that their health and wellness is going to be safe. So not only do we have the fiscal impact, but we have the mental health impact. We have the staff morale impact. And so again, it was more far reaching than I think they ever expected. And we always just want to reiterate that again, we are not as they attempt to take apart these DEI programs. The money to Indian country is not DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. The money to Indian country is treaty and trust obligation. And that is what we need to continue to message to the administration. And we need to do some really strong education and advocacy to let them understand that when these things happen, they need to look at exemptions for Indian country and to ensure that they're fulfilling treaty and trust obligation.
Mike, how do you see this coming down in the next week or so, and what's the impact on Indian country?
Well, there's a couple of things I'd like to address first, and it's something that both Robert and Abigail discussed. One is I'm sorry for those agencies that are going through this. It is absolutely a challenge. But as Abigail mentioned, this is not new for any incoming administration at the federal level or even at the tribal level. You bring in new people, they have a fiduciary responsibility to see where the money's going, where the money has been going, and see if those projects are actually online. We have two, what I would consider historical mandates or historical issues that have come up with this particular change in administration that has caused such a large disruption. The first is the Trump administration fervently believes that they came with a mandate to make changes in Washington, and that's what they're looking for. The second thing is we are coming out of the COVID era. Where we have seen trillions of federal dollars being put out from Washington, D.C. to try to help maintain the issues or at least overcome the issues we've seen with the pandemic with very little oversight. And so now with this new administration, there's an opportunity to look at those things and to look at those programs and to see where the money is actually flowing and if the federal dollars and the American taxpayers' money is actually being spent correctly. It is a huge challenge. And I would say that OMB made a mistake in not giving enough guidance. Their original guidance said it was limited to certain executive orders and not every grant or loan program across the federal government. I think they could have given more guidance in doing that, but I do think, however, in the president's fiduciary responsibility to make sure that American taxpayer dollars are being properly spent, that something like this has to happen, and we have to go back and look at it. I also have to agree with Abigail on another point that is so very important for natives on both sides of the aisle, that DEI is not Indian. We just had a very important case that went through the Supreme Court, uh, the Burkine v. Holland case in discerning ICWA and whether or not ICWA was a race-based policy or political-based policy. And the Supreme Court agreed that it was a political-based policy, that federal Indian law is a political question, a government-to-government relations type question versus a race question. We have to continue to educate our legislators and the members of the administration that that's the case when it comes to Indian policy, that there is a huge difference and there's a historical background there for the trust and treaty obligations. And so I see us moving forward. There is a need for us to look at all the money being spent. Certainly, in the time frame the Trump administration put that in till February 10th is not enough time to review everything, but it is enough time to get an understanding of what's going on. And I think as they attempted to turn off the spigots, even though the spigots didn't even get turned off in some cases, that they're seeing where the impacts are being felt, and that'll help guide them going forward. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. The stay from the federal court is only through Monday. That is a whole nother discussion. If we have time for, I'd like to talk about it. It'll be interesting to see how Trump responds to many of these stays coming from federal courts. Um, Being who he is, I have a hard time imagining that he's going to continue to allow federal district judges to stop his implementation of his policies.
Robert, your viewpoint is from the policy and economic standpoint for tribes. How do you view this situation, and how should tribes prepare for this?
Yeah, one of the interesting things is when you go through the list of programs that could be impacted here, and then you read some of the context that the Trump administration put out for its motivation for acting. The Trump administration cites, for example, that financial assistance should be dedicated to advancing administration priorities. And the first priority it lays out is focusing taxpayer dollars on advancing stronger and safer communities. So when you go through the programs and you see things like, for example, the Tribal Homeland Security Grant Program, or the DOJ Indian Country Investigations Program, or the Interior Indian Law Enforcement Program get included, it really calls into question, whether this approach is, going to do things even that the administration says it's going to do. For example, you know, making communities safer and more prosperous. All in, there's about $32 billion a year that flows to Indian country, and under a separate executive order around American energy, we've seen about almost $4 billion in future federal spending from FY 2025 and beyond that is already being paused through funding through things like the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan investment bill. So there's already, that funding is paused separately. That's going to have an impact. That's going to affect new investments around energy, around critical infrastructure that are happening in tribal communities. Tribal communities have, embraced in a lot of ways things like green energy, in addition to a whole bunch of different energy sources within their lands. And so, when we're thinking about transforming tribal economies, it's absolutely going to have an impact. And these, further funding pauses, if they do happen, are only going to contribute more to that.
Robert, you mentioned the executive orders, and there's been a bunch of them. And I can't even tell you how many, and there seems to be more and more coming out. Michael, I wonder if you could tell us about maybe some of the misunderstandings about all this executive order flurry.
I think flurry is the correct word, and the misunderstanding is probably the biggest challenge. One, you're going to have miscommunication and poor communication when it comes to such a large amount of information coming out so quickly and orders coming out so quickly. There's also a lot of, I don't know that it's intentional or malicious, but there's also a lot of information I'm seeing coming out of news sources that actually cause more of a problem. The example we have is this question that the Trump administration has brought up versus birthright citizenship in an attempt to stop it because they feel that the jurisdiction clause of the 14th Amendment may apply to undocumented citizens or citizens of another country coming here without permission, or illegal aliens, however, whatever term that we're going to use today to describe these folks who are here without a visa. Um, the the initial impact was, or push out there was that Trump was coming after Indians, but that was not the case. In fact, he was using an example of the Indian Citizenship Right Act of 1924, which was needed because under the 14th Amendment, American Indians were not considered American citizens. They did not have birthright citizenship. And so they were making a legal argument under a theory that says if American Indians who enter to a separate jurisdiction, meaning their tribes, can that same thing apply to immigrants, undocumented immigrants who are here that have not gone through that process or who actually answer to another sovereign? It's a question that has not been answered before the court. Um, there are some similar cases. There was a Supreme Court case in the 1890s involving a Chinese citizen that came up in question, but the theory that the Trump administration is promoting was never brought up. And so, as we've seen, courts are willing to relook at these things. If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have the McGirt decision here in Oklahoma if the courts weren't willing to look at things that we thought were settled law. Simply because we've moved forward with them does not mean that they're actually constitutional or correct. There's so many things going on right now. There is a flurry of activity, as you said, and there's a lot of miscommunication around it. I think a little patience would be good, and actually reading would be helpful. If people would take the time to read the executive orders and not necessarily the interpretation of someone else.
We'll be talking about some of these other executive orders in this program. I want to thank you all for getting up early this morning, this Wednesday morning, and talking with us. Abigail Echohawk out of Seattle, Robert Maxim from the Brookings Metro, Michael Stopp from Seven Star Holdings. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Kapatanomo, thank you all.
For the latest updates on this story and more, visit our website at ictnews.org. Indigenous knowledge holds powerful keys to combating climate change. One Southern California tribe is blending traditional wisdom with modern strategies to fight fires. Take a look.
The devastating Los Angeles fires are bringing attention to fire control. A Southern California tribe isn't kidding in adopting low-tech methods in fire prevention. They've got your goat. The San Manuel Band of Mission Indians employs kids, does, and bucks to eat the dry, flammable brush. On the tribe's 1,000-acre reservation, dry brush gets ignited by high winds that topple electrical wires or from lightning strikes, fireworks, or careless campfires. Embers can shoot for miles, setting new fires. The San Manuel Fire Department cares for the goats. It's one of the top fire departments in the country. It has 61 full-time employees, 2 fire stations, and handles over 20,000 emergency responses every year. Assistant Fire Chief Ralph Tovar said the goats proved themselves during a recent wildfire. It stopped the spread once it reached the brushy area chewed down by the goats. The fire department arrived and quickly put out the rest of the flames. For ICT, I'm Shirley Snavy.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more, visit ictnews.org. And from all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.